You think you can come to my wedding in a cheap suit? That's exactly what the groom asked, mockingly, calling security to kick me out of my own daughter's wedding. But the guards froze. We can't. He's a VIP, they whispered. The entire hall held its breath. And in that moment I realized this wasn't just a matter of fabric or style. This was about power, wealth, and the assumptions people make when they think they're superior. Before we dive into what happened next, ask yourself, what would you do if someone humiliated you in front of everyone you loved? I had walked into Christine's dining room expecting polite introductions, pleasant conversation, maybe a few awkward smiles. Instead, I was met with Martin. His second glass of wine had loosened more than just his tongue. "Honestly, Eldon, where did you even find that suit?" he asked. Some thrift store clearance rack, I thought, but kept my mouth shut. I had been seated across from a man whose gaze evaluated me like damaged goods, like a collector appraising items for resale. Kristen's voice cut through the tension as she emerged with serving dishes, but Martin waved her off with a hand gesture that sent wine sloshing dangerously close to the rim of his glass. No, sweetheart. Your father seems decent enough, but presentation matters," he said, sipping, eyes scanning me as if I were an exhibit. Every word was carefully designed to sting. Every pause emphasized his perceived superiority. The warm light of the dining room felt harsh against my skin, highlighting the contrast between his wealth and my modest life. But I didn't flinch. As I listened to Martin, my mind catalogued each gesture, each phrase. 30 years on the bench had taught me to read humans like open books. Martin displayed classic symptoms: narcissistic entitlement, the casual cruelty that comes from believing social dominance translates to moral authority. He assumed that my suit, my life, my dignity could be measured in dollars and thread count. He didn't know me, my career, or my experiences, but in his universe, wealth and status equaled worth. As I assessed the danger, I realized this confrontation wasn't about me. It was about control. Power had to be demonstrated, boundaries enforced, and people reminded of their place. But I had a lifetime of practice dealing with arrogance disguised as authority. Martin's offer to pay for the wedding seemed generous at first, until I recognized the true intent: dominance disguised as charity. He wanted to control, to assert, to ensure that his image remained untarnished by what he considered my inadequacy. But I remained calm, polite, and firm, refusing to be bullied or shamed. Kristen, caught between loyalty to her father and love for her fiancé, fidgeted with her engagement ring, a nervous gesture that revealed how fragile these social hierarchies could be. Martin misread everything. He assumed fear, compliance, and gratitude. He would soon learn that patience, observation, and strategy could outweigh wealth, power, and arrogance. The following 30 days were spent preparing in silence. I studied the guest list, mapped the Beverly Wilshire's ballroom, and rehearsed interactions with the social elite. My suit hung in the closet like evidence in a case file, pressed, impeccable, and waiting for the confrontation it had become. Each day I imagined potential scenarios. What would Martin say? How would he act? And how would I respond without compromising dignity or decorum? I prepared mentally and physically, assembling my attire with ritual precision: crisp white shirt, tie knotted with care, shoes polished to a reflective shine. This was armor, not for battle in the conventional sense, but for a subtle war of respect, perception, and authority. Every wrinkle avoided, every cuff inspected, symbolized a refusal to be diminished. The morning of the wedding arrived like a calm before a storm. I dressed, ate breakfast standing at the counter, and reviewed my plan quietly. The Beverly Wilshire rose in the distance, gleaming under the California sun, a monument to wealth and status. My car, modest and reliable, slid into the valet lineup, an understated presence among luxury vehicles. Inside, marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and a string quartet welcomed the social elite. Guests mingled, their conversations colored by subtle competitions, status signaling, and whispers of who belonged and who did not. And there, near the altar, stood Kristen, my daughter, radiant in ivory silk, moving with grace I had never quite mastered myself. For a moment, pride threatened to undo my focus, but I reminded myself, this day was about more than appearances. Martin spotted me immediately. His eyes widened, recognition dawning like a slow, reluctant sunrise. The same $100 suit that had drawn his wrath a month earlier now faced him in full dignity. He approached, voice quiet but tense. I warned you about that suit. I remained calm. Martin, let's not spoil Kristen's day with unnecessary drama. Around us, the ballroom quieted as more guests turned, sensing tension. His face flushed, indignation apparent, but I did not flinch. Every word, every gesture was under careful observation. He expected fear, apology, perhaps even retreat. Instead, he was met with composure, with patience earned from decades of seeing arrogance exposed and deflated. The public confrontation became a theater of contrast, wealth versus wisdom, arrogance versus quiet authority. After the event, I reflected on what had occurred. Martin's actions revealed more than superficial arrogance. They exposed patterns of entitlement, narcissism, and power assertion. Kristen's perspective, torn between love and reality, helped frame the bigger picture. True character cannot be dictated by wealth, clothing, or social positioning. Patience, observation, and dignity remain the ultimate tools for influence and respect. The wedding passed with grace, but the lessons remained. Wealth may command attention, but character earns lasting recognition. In subtle ways, justice had been delivered, not through confrontation, but through composure, presence, and unwavering adherence to principle. What does this story teach us? That dignity, preparation, and calm observation can neutralize arrogance. That appearances may impress, but integrity and patience define real influence. Martin Harrove had assumed control, assumed superiority, and assumed I would comply. He was wrong. And the quiet satisfaction of maintaining one's principles, of standing firm in the face of entitlement, is a victory no amount of wealth can buy. Let this story remind you, the battles that matter are often silent, observed, and deliberate. True power lies not in the loud display of wealth, but in the consistent, patient exercise of wisdom and character. Walking into the ballroom, I noticed the subtle language of the wealthy at play. Every laugh, every tilt of a head, every raised glass carried a hidden meaning. Venture capitalists discussed portfolios with casual authority, tech entrepreneurs exchanged nods of recognition, and old money families surveyed the room with slow, measured gazes. Each interaction was a performance, a ritual of dominance and submission, yet I remained an observer, detached yet acutely aware. I watched Martin navigate the crowd, performing the role he thought was his birthright, unaware that my presence disrupted the narrative he had rehearsed in his mind for weeks. I studied his expressions like case evidence, every flicker of irritation, every forced smile, every glance of impatience noted for future reflection. Kristen moved through the crowd with a balance of grace and authority that belied her earlier vulnerability. Her eyes occasionally found mine, and in those moments I saw trust, reassurance, and subtle acknowledgement that she knew I understood more than I revealed. She laughed politely at jokes that weren't funny, nodded in approval where courtesy demanded, and maintained a composed elegance that left Martin momentarily off balance. I recognized these small but deliberate maneuvers, how she managed social power in a world that demanded performance. Kristen had inherited neither arrogance nor entitlement. She possessed strategy, awareness, and patience, the tools of influence that would serve her far more than wealth ever could. As the evening progressed, Martin attempted what he likely assumed would be a subtle reminder of authority. Standing near the hors d'oeuvres table, he leaned toward me with a soft-spoken warning about decorum, timing, and attire. But this time I did not flinch. My posture remained unshaken, my expression calm. Every attempt he made to assert control was countered by silent resistance, by the careful observation of a man who understood the dynamics at play. Each whispered comment, each attempt at manipulation, only revealed more about his character. I realized that the power struggle wasn't about suits or weddings. It was about ego, hierarchy, and the dangerous illusion that money equates to unquestionable authority. I reflected on my own experiences. 30 years on the bench had taught me that authority without accountability is fragile, and cruelty disguised as concern is often transparent to those who watch closely. Martin's actions mirrored many defendants I had faced, individuals confident in the perceived immunity of their social or financial position, certain that the rules applied only to others. And yet, in this social theater of wedding etiquette and luxury, I held the quiet power of observation, patience, and integrity. It was not flamboyant. It was not dramatic. It was precise, deliberate, and enduring. The difference between him and me was not the suit I wore, it was the consistency of character beneath it. The string quartet transitioned to a softer, slower piece, and Martin seized the moment to approach Kristen once again, speaking in a tone meant to impress and dominate. But Kristen, guided by instinct and subtle cues she had learned from observation, parried his advances with politeness and confidence. I remained close enough to notice, yet far enough to let the moment unfold naturally. His frustration became evident, his usual charm faltering under the subtle resistance of a daughter who refused to be dominated and a father who refused to bow. Each misstep he made, each awkward pause, was silently catalogued. This was a test, and he was unaware that he was failing. In the corner of the room, unnoticed by most, I allowed myself a small, private acknowledgement of victory. Martin's subtle intimidation had lost its effect. His attempts to assert dominance, control perceptions, and dictate behavior had been neutralized by composure, awareness, and preparation. Wealth can influence, charm can persuade, but consistency, dignity, and patience, the kind built over decades, hold far more weight in subtle conflicts. The quiet satisfaction of this realization reinforced my belief in measured responses over reactionary gestures, and I allowed the moment to pass without celebration. As conversations swirled around me, I noted the broader dynamics of human behavior. Some guests sought attention, others avoided it. Some leveraged connections, others relied on charm. Each individual was a study in priorities, habits, and social signaling. In observing, I drew comparisons to courtroom dynamics, motives revealed through gesture, truth hidden in phrasing, intentions betrayed by pauses and micro-expressions. Social rituals at a wedding mirrored legal proceedings in ways both subtle and profound. The human desire for dominance, recognition, and respect transcends context, whether in a courtroom or a luxury ballroom. Midway through the reception, a misstep from Martin drew murmurs among the guests, a misplaced joke, an overly familiar comment, a glance that failed to land as intended. The room, so carefully curated and rehearsed, reacted subtly yet unmistakably. People shifted slightly, eyes averted, whispers shared. Social authority is fragile, I reminded myself, and perception often carries more power than reality. The $100 suit, which had become a symbol of understated dignity, now acted as a silent assertion of boundaries. The lesson was clear. True respect cannot be bought. It must be earned and maintained. Kristen, sensing the tension, guided Martin back toward polite engagement, offering smiles, gentle conversation, and subtle cues that redirected the flow without overt confrontation. She had learned to navigate power dynamics delicately, balancing charm and authority. I watched her, aware of the parallels to my own professional life. Authority tempered with insight is far more effective than raw aggression. Her choices reflected emotional intelligence, strategic patience, and the ability to influence without direct assertion, a reminder that power comes in many forms. As the evening wound down, I allowed myself a moment to reflect on what had transpired. Wealth, status, and bravado had been countered not by confrontation, but by patience, observation, and principle. The $100 suit, initially a point of contention, had become a symbol, not of limitation, but of dignity maintained under scrutiny. Martin's assumptions about control and authority had been subtly challenged, his ego tempered by social reality. And through it all, Kristen's trust and respect had remained intact, a testament to preparation, patience, and strategic composure. Guests began arriving in groups, laughter spilling through the grand lobby of the Beverly Wilshire. Fashionable ensembles brushed past each other, the hum of recognition and small talk filling the space. I noticed the subtleties immediately, who greeted whom first, the hierarchy implied in the order of introductions. Martin moved among them like a general surveying his troops, checking for approval, measuring social power. I, in contrast, observed quietly, noting who would ally with him, who would doubt him, and who might notice the cracks in his veneer. Each interaction was evidence, and I catalogued it meticulously. Kristen caught my eye again, a small gesture signaling gratitude and recognition. It was subtle, easily missed by anyone not paying attention, but I saw it clearly. The silent communication between us had evolved over decades, shaped by trust and shared understanding. I did not need to speak. My presence alone communicated support. Martin, oblivious to this bond, approached with his usual confidence, unaware that he was already being countered not by words, but by silent influence. I watched the way Martin interacted with the staff, orders issued with casual authority, instructions given with a hint of disdain. These microaggressions were consistent with his earlier behavior, and the staff's subtle compliance spoke volumes about social hierarchy in his world. Yet for every gesture there was a ripple of human awareness, a silent acknowledgement that authority is often performative. I catalogued every motion, every pause, every tilt of the head, as if taking testimony in a courtroom where no one had been sworn in. The master of ceremonies raised his glass, signaling the first toast. Conversations hushed, eyes turned toward the couple. Kristen's beauty shone like moonlight in the soft gold illumination of the room. Martin attempted to interject a clever remark, but I noticed the subtle tension in his shoulders, the slight falter in his voice. He was performing, and for the first time, it was visible that he was aware of an invisible observer, the quiet, composed man in the $100 suit who had refused to be intimidated. As champagne flowed and laughter echoed, I reflected on the illusions of wealth. Here was power, influence, and luxury displayed in every corner, yet I had long understood that such things are external markers, not true indicators of character. Martin's assumptions, like many of those who equate affluence with virtue, were flawed. True authority is earned, tested through adversity, and demonstrated consistently over time. Tonight I held that authority quietly, imperceptibly, yet irrevocably. Throughout the evening, Martin attempted subtle assertions, leaning too closely, speaking too loudly, offering unsolicited advice to others. I observed his missteps like a judge evaluating a witness, noting inconsistencies between words and intention. Every attempt at control faltered slightly under the weight of social reality. His mask of polished confidence had begun to crack, revealing glimpses of insecurity and the fragile ego beneath. Kristen moved with awareness, guiding conversations, acknowledging introductions, and steering the flow of attention subtly. She had mastered the art of influence without confrontation, ensuring that decorum remained intact while mitigating Martin's more aggressive impulses. Observing her, I was reminded that the ability to balance power with diplomacy is rare and requires both intelligence and emotional awareness. Between dances, I found a quiet corridor overlooking the ballroom. From this vantage point, I observed Martin as he interacted with guests. His movements were confident yet rigid, rehearsed yet faltering. The very luxury he sought to command became his prison, dictating behavior and constraining authenticity. In contrast, I felt no need to perform. My presence carried weight without display, my authority inherent and self-contained. I had reviewed the guest list weeks ago, memorized the names, relationships, and implied hierarchies. Each arrival provided additional insight into social dynamics. Who respected Martin? Who observed cautiously? Who questioned silently? The patterns were subtle yet telling. Even in a room filled with wealth, privilege, and power, the invisible lines of influence and respect were visible to those trained to observe. And I had spent decades honing that skill. Martin attempted another interaction with me, this time closer to the dance floor, attempting to assert dominance in proximity and tone. But the room itself seemed to resist his narrative. Guests noticed his agitation. Kristen guided him with subtle authority, and I remained composed. The silent power shift was occurring. Control was no longer exclusively his. His influence had limits, and tonight they were becoming visible. A distant cousin of Kristen's, previously unnoticed, made a subtle comment to Martin that undercut his authority. I observed with quiet satisfaction, influence is relational, not absolute, and even in elite circles, allies can shift unexpectedly. The evening's social dynamics were fluid, revealing vulnerabilities even in those confident of their dominance. Martin was learning this lesson in real time. The couple took the floor for their first dance. Guests watched, smiles polite, eyes attentive. I noticed Martin's gaze, initially calculated, then unsteady, as if the public display of love and unity undermined his efforts to dominate the room. I realized the simplicity of presence and authenticity often outweighs orchestrated control, and I allowed myself a quiet recognition of that truth. A professional photographer captured moments, framing narratives for eternity. Martin tried to control angles, gestures, and expressions, but I moved naturally, unself-conscious, and unmanipulated. My quiet dignity translated into the photographs in ways his contrived presence could not. Images convey truth beyond spoken words, and I trusted that time would reveal the difference between performance and authenticity. Martin attempted a subtle directive to the catering staff, suggesting adjustments to timing and presentation. His tone, meant to project authority, instead created friction. Guests noticed, some offering polite smiles tinged with disapproval. Even wealth and influence have boundaries, I reminded myself. Tonight, those boundaries were quietly but visibly tested. Kristen found me during a brief interlude, her hand resting on mine. "Thank you for being here," she whispered. I offered a subtle nod. Moments like these, unobserved by the majority, carry more weight than any public gesture. It was acknowledgement, trust, and reassurance distilled into silence, far more powerful than any argument or confrontation. The hotel staff moved with precision, efficiency, and quiet professionalism. I noticed how Martin's interactions occasionally disrupted their rhythm. Authority untempered by respect often backfires. I noted the micro-reactions, polite compliance paired with internal evaluation. Even the subtlest behavior communicates volumes, and I cataloged it like evidence for future reflection. Standing near the bar, I allowed myself a moment to reflect on how much had changed since the initial dinner. Martin's arrogance had been tempered by social reality. Kristen's poise had asserted subtle control, and my quiet patience had ensured dignity remained intact. Authority manifests in many ways. Tonight, it had been exercised through observation, restraint, and timing. Kristen's father-in-law attempted a short speech meant to impress and command respect. I listened carefully, noting every tone, shift, hesitation, and attempt at dominance. Public displays of power often reveal more than they conceal, and tonight was no exception. Martin's gestures, though polished, carried echoes of insecurity that were visible to those trained to observe. As the evening drew to a close, the final toast was made. I observed the reactions, subtle nods of approval, polite smiles, and attention, focused not on wealth but on composure, character, and authenticity. The $100 suit, once a point of contention, had become a symbol of measured dignity, respected without announcement or confrontation. Guests began to leave, the elegant performance gradually dissolving into ordinary exits. I accompanied Kristen briefly, noting the subtle shifts in interactions as formality gave way to casual departure. Martin lingered, attempting to salvage pride and influence. His efforts were polite but strained, revealing the gap between intention and perception. Once the ballroom emptied, Kristen confided in me briefly. "He's different when it matters," she said softly. "But tonight you showed him something he didn't expect." I simply nodded, understanding that influence often operates silently, in ways unacknowledged by those attempting to wield it. Returning home, I reflected on the evening. Wealth, status, and performance had been neutralized by patience, composure, and observation. The contested suit had served as more than clothing. It had symbolized dignity, preparation, and quiet authority. Tonight, lessons had been learned, social hierarchies subtly shifted, and the true weight of character had been revealed.